Let's start with a revision of Model B, the model described in Kein Stein and in Hawking. We are quite close to the ancient myth, close to the first chapter of Genesis. When creation started, there was, says Genesis, a limited space, the surface of the waters. There was the waters in the abyss, but in this water no object and no movement, tohu bohu. There was also the source of energy, the programmer, Elohim, and there was high energy, Ruach. Three well-defined components, enough to start creation without requiring a miracle or a Big Bang. For Model B there is, an empty space, infinite maybe. We call it the ayer. In the ayer there is Om, a drop of Ga. Ga is composed of pliable granules. The set of granules is a ret, a kind of random network. The granules are immersed into a liquid, Mu. In this drop, no organization and no movement, no dynamic energy. The components are kept together by adhesive and cohesive forces. This set of forces is gluing energy. We call it Thanatos. Creation starts in a spot of Om. There, suddenly, dynamic energy agitates the Ga. This energy, undoubtedly, must have come from somewhere. We assume, that's a postulate, we assume that everything comes from something. Thus, we state that there is something else in the ayer, some other something besides Om. We call it A or Alpha or Creator or odd, uneven, singular, particular. It remains aloof and contact is quickly interrupted. Creation starts with a slap, not an explosion. We call it BB for bonne baffe in French, good slap. Absolutely no Big Bang. There was an energy transfer and maybe at the same time transfer of a shape, of a seal, of a program, a pattern. We call it patron. A pattern we could influence whatever gets created and its evolution. This imported energy, we call it eros. This imported energy squeezes the first row of granules, crushing them, squeezing them, flattening them somewhat. The squeezing of the first row causes a bulging of the granules of the next, more internal row. We see it as a wave in a water mattress, or the wave in the ocean shore, the dream of the surfers. Physicists will have to work it out. We are but architects, dreamers. We think the string theories will precise all that. The energy, eros, moves into the entire ret as a tsunami, causing the formation of compressed and expanded granules. The energy blown into a granule is a quantum. In open space, quanta give rise to photons. The crushed granule occupies a volume smaller than at rest. At this point, the granule is what we call a monk. As a monk is smaller than the average resting granule, it acts as a pothole in a uniform pavement, a relatively negative pressure. This is a cause of the universal attraction of gravitation. And this way, progressively, both effects of the energy spread into the entire ret. In the first step of creation, this spreading of the energy wave gives the impression that the photons are conquering space, when in fact what is observed is a progressive making of the two active states of the granules, photons and monks. The next step is the making of particles. The presence of monks alters the trajectory of the quanta of the photons. It eventually leads to the capture of photons by the gravitational field of one or several monks. The accumulation of ever more complex arrangements is the origin of matter. As we can see, matter is a set of quanta and monks, in other words, waves that move together, supported by the granules. Contrary to our perception of matter, there is nothing solid. Matter is a set of monks and quanta held together by gravitation, by the behavior of the quanta, as well as by electricity. At this point, we have not really established the origin of electricity. We suggest it in Kein Stein, but so far we haven't described it well. Everything material contains both quanta and mass, even the electrons and positrons. There is no guarantee that during the first phase of creation, quanta and mass were made in equal numbers. Despite this uncertainty, we feel free to state that there is a large number of free mass that are not incorporated into matter, just as there is an infinity of free photons. You see some of them in the sky at night. We mentioned these mass in the first presentation and affirmed that they are the cause of the quasi-material influence presented by space, the cause of the black matter. Just as electromagnetic waves, the free mass are everywhere to be found, and thus there are certainly many of them inside every piece of matter. In any matter, the rate is compressed and the granules are closer to one another than in empty space. We can imagine thus that the mass found inside all material volumes are brought closer to one another than in a surrounding space. As they are closer together, they attract one another, something they probably don't do in the empty space. These free mass form a structure, an organization parallel to the matter in which they are located, an immaterial structure, an immaterial skeleton. This form, we call it charm. What about living creatures? Basically, we are pieces of matter, and thus we have our own charm. What about the other life forms? We can assume that the unicellular has a charm. The unicellular is living, i.e., its shape varies on account of biological events. For the unicellular, the world is defined into I and not I. Its charm is the image of I. We could call it the I, but we chose to call it moi, French for me, for I, ego. The next evolutionary step is the tissue, a flat group of unicellular that share food and energy. That creature has its own charm, its living charm. We'll call it its own moi. But what about the cells that it is made of? Each of them has its own dimension, limits, characteristics. Thus, each of them has an independent charm, its own moi. There are as many of them as there are cells inside the new creature, all practically similar, everywhere inside this new creature, this tissue. In this creature there are thus two distinct charms, two levels of perception of influence. These special cells don't have the same geometrical characteristics, which means that they are not affected the same way by the vibrations that agitate non-stop the entire Ga. Vibrations transmitted through mu. This double charm, double moi, is also affected by the physiological operations of the creatures where it is lodged. Inversely, it allows the waves that it perceives to have an influence over the living creature where it is being formed. It makes sense to see these two levels of charm as something special, something specific to the living biological organization. The unicellular has one moi, the tissue has two. Next evolutionary step, the hydra, a three-dimensional creature with a nervous system and a motor system. As this creature changes form, it is set with a still more complex moi. At this level, the animal, it is an animal now that it moves, the animal has three moi. Afterwards come the tube, the worm, a still more complex system, richer and generating yet another moi. We have now four moi inside the same animal. Each of these moi catches, produces, transmits information to the entire animal, an ever larger set of data. The next step in evolution is double. On one hand, a group of creatures that conquer the sea, they become the agnates, and on the other hand, the arthropod, and in its more advanced level, it is the insect. They have conquered the air, the dry world. Thus, the jawless fish has 5 moi, and the insect also. Each of these moi catches, produces, transmits information to the entire animal. To some extent, we could see the entire set as a living creature inside of living beings. They are somewhat interactive. These black material, echo creatures, have no solid contact with the material world. That will have to be studied in detail, not here. The next step is enormously more complex. It is the formation of the gnatostomes that we call vertebrate, a hybrid animal, half simple fish, half insect. With him, the moi 6 come to be. This introduces us to mankind, an animal that is little more than a complex alteration of the previous one, not that far from the previous vertebrates. In this animal, in all of us, the moi 7 is formed. This moi 7 is the image of the intellectual activity, image of something that is not really solid, the thoughts, yet solid enough, material enough to communicate with itself and with the concrete world around. This allows us to understand that the sum of the moi, they are all inside of us, is close enough to our superficial conscious experience to have been perceived by many thinkers and dreamers over the century, giving rise to the notion of soul. It is not by mere chance that the many esoteric traditions and all religions describe various planes of experience and reality, of various inner bodies, not a coincidence that they have reached a notion of 7 heavens. Thanks to our investigation, all branches of science are going to hop ahead. A small step for man, a huge leap for mankind. It fits the prediction concerning the Age of Aquarius. In other treatises, we concluded that the set of thoughts can be seen as a quasi-material substance. We call it nevrome. It is really a form of matter, as it presents all the characteristics of matter. It has a shape, a material substance, and energy that moves it non-stop. The nevrome is very malleable, soft enough to be influenced by the black matter of the moi. Thinking, meditating, dreaming are activities linking our mind to this moi and their contents. The Ga is a keeper of all kinds of information, as all activities yield waves information. Thus, the soul keeps us in touch with the universe. This concept is familiar as we all use receptors of otherwise imperceptible information, television, telephone, internet. Inversely, our thoughts can alter the content of each of the mois, ours and those of others, both as a receptor and as a sender. As a sender, we grasp that our thoughts are copied as charms, that they can influence the world around us, the soul, and the nevrome of others. The charms created by the activity of nevromes, the charms created by thinking, are to be seen as a special set. We call them haunts. There's a person, a soul, who carries a charm, a haunt, created voluntarily or not by someone, is blessed or cursed. These haunts can be stuck, integrated into the charm of an object. A place that carries such a haunt is said to be haunted. This would take us into the domain of religion, at the limit of psychology with the notions of sins, and those of confession as well as blessing and cursing, not forgetting brainwashing, civilization, socialization, social networking with a wealth of fake news.